Hello and welcome back to another video. This time we're looking at the Famitsu interview that came out actually today on the 31st of July, just in time for our 7.3 coverage next week. And the Famitsu interview is quite long. It is translated by Google's translation thing, so it's probably going to be all over the place, but we should be able to understand the basics. So yeah, obviously the 5th of August is when we're getting the 7.3 patch. Naoki Yoshida, the producer and director of Final Fantasy XIV, sat down with Famitsu, as they usually do, to spill the beans on the promise of tomorrow and upcoming features as well. So first, let's get straight into it then, and we'll read through the questions and the answers so you can sit tight. Instead of reading this massive monolith of text yourself or translating it yourself, you can just sit down, maybe you're driving somewhere or doing other things, and listen to me drone on about it. So first of all, the next Fork Tower will have multiple difficulty levels. That's the title of this segment. So the Famitsu interviewer says, before we talk about 7.3, I'd like to ask a little about the content of 7.2. The 87th letter from a producer live, which took place recently, had a section where you responded to feedback on the Crescent Isle, Mirage Island as they call it. So obviously, are called Crescent, and also Cosmic Exploration. I don't think there's been a case in recent letter from a producer lives where you devoted so much time and effort to answering such questions. What was the intention behind this? Interesting question, isn't it? Yoshi P says, first of all, I'd like to apologize for the recent record high number of emergency maintenances. Final Fantasy XIV has been operated for over a decade with the goal of eliminating scheduled maintenance and minimizing downtime due to emergency maintenance, despite the fact that it's a monthly subscription service. I'm truly sorry that things have turned out this way. While I was central in the decision to push the massive content to 7.2, there were some aspects of the process that didn't go smoothly. This was the first time we'd simultaneously implemented major content that would have taken months to complete, and our staff simply couldn't keep up with the sheer volume of work. In addition, we reworked the base system for Cosmic Exploration numerous times, which took up a lot of time. This impacted the QA or Quality Assurance team, resulting in numerous bugs just before release. We fixed the immediately visible issues, but bugs that triggered on a frame or timescale remained, so we had to implement emergency maintenance as a means of immediate response. So the interviewer goes, so that's how it all happened? Yoshi P says, and as for the issue of entering Occult Crescent, since the trouble had become a hot topic in the community, I felt that it absolutely had to be mentioned in the letter from a producer live. Of course, in the past, we've taken time at the beginning of PLLs to explain what happened, but this time there simply wasn't enough time at the beginning. It wouldn't be convincing unless I was once again explaining to players my understanding of the current situation and how we plan to improve it. So that's why I took that time. The interviewer says, looking back, PLLs for the old Final Fantasy XIV were often formatted like that, weren't they? This reminded me of that, they say. Yoshi P says, you're right, and in a sense, the 87th letter from a producer live may have been a similar broadcast to the one for the original Final Fantasy XIV. Lately, the focus has been on introducing content, but that was the format that the PLL was originally meant to be. The interviewer says, during the broadcast you responded to various pieces of feedback from players, but after seeing the reactions that followed, is there anything you feel you didn't say enough about? Please take this opportunity to tell us. So that's exactly what Yoshi P says and does. Yoshi P says, I used the word cost during the broadcast, but I think I may have been a little unclear. Of course, even if I explained it in detail, it would still be dismissed as irrelevant to players. But since it's a topic that inevitably comes up, I'd like to briefly explain it again. Currently, the Final Fantasy XIV team has several hundred staff members involved in development alone. Looking back, the number of staff members has been steadily increasing. But even so, developing large-scale content requires a period of several patches before it can reach a level that's acceptable to consumers. While you might think, quote, then we should just increase the number of staff members, end quote. The actual development speed and quality depend not simply on the number of people, but on the number of leaders in each section. This is true not only in game development, but in any other creative field. As technical professionals, we create a hierarchy of people who can create interesting things based on taste and skill level. Leaders emerge from within this hierarchy, but the number of such leaders becomes an issue. Furthermore, it's common for people who previously played a playing manager role, creating things themselves while managing subordinates, to suddenly stop producing interesting content when they focus solely on management. The interviewer says, that's the same could be said for our industry. So talking about journalism. Yoshi says, so even though we're talking about personal costs or personnel costs, it's not a simple calculation of numbers. We're also planning to increase the number of staff on the QA team, but it's not just about increasing the number of testers. We'll also need a leader who can allocate personnel by taking into account how to test efficiently and where bugs are likely to appear. Naturally, we've been trying to increase the number of such people for the past decade or so, but it's not easy to do so. I think this is also related to the fact that there is an absolute shortage of online game developers in Japan. End quote. The interviewer says, it's true that even within the Japanese game industry, there are only a limited number of people with experience in online game development. Yoshi says, now young people are playing Final Fantasy XIV and then coming together saying, I want to make Final Fantasy XIV, and that staff is growing at an incredible speed. We're very grateful that the number of developers is increasing thanks to 14, which we've created. However, there aren't many core staff members in the world who can create an MMORPG of this scale, so whether we can easily increase our staff is another matter. That said, we've of course not given up on increasing our staff, and we're increasing and developing them over time, but the current situation is that it has become a competition with the scale-up of 14 itself. So the interviewer says, so the cost includes staffing costs like that. Yoshi says, yes, with such limited personnel costs and a 4-month cycle, we have to aim to maintain a certain level of quality. What's more, we're also running development on a large scale content that takes about 2 patches, so we need to manage all of that while checking all of the specifications and implementing them. Again, if players say, it's none of our business, that's true, but one of the policies I set for Final Fantasy XIV is to clearly explain why something can't be done, so it's a real challenge. The interviewer says, you're aware of the issue, but it's difficult to improve it right away. Yoshi P says, of course. Within Square Enix, priority is given to assigning personnel to the Final Fantasy XIV team. We also hire staff for 14 separately. Therefore, if you're a player who thinks you're a perfect fit, we would be extremely grateful if you would apply. After all, as it is an online title that has been around for such a long time, it can be difficult for people who are unfamiliar with Final Fantasy XIV to join, but players themselves understand it best, which is also a major advantage, end quote. The interviewer says, even if you have a high technical level, it seems like it would be a high hurdle for someone who has never played 14 to join the team. Yoshi says, we also hear from overseas developers that they would like to work here, but in those cases, the language barrier is a big one. For titles being developed in Japan, they need to learn Japanese, which is another difficult issue. So moving on, the interviewer says, one more question about the feedback on 7.2. Crescent Isle implemented a system where 48 people can enter the island together, but how do you plan to develop it going forward based on player feedback? Yoshi says, we've already implemented the entry feature, and our next step is to introduce a system that allows players to keep the instance for a certain period of time after entry. Regarding the number of activation tokens required to enter the Fork Tower, we plan to add a system that lets players know how many tokens have been used and whether they have been confirmed as a player, since displaying all of them could lead to conflict between players. Whether we will adjust the mechanics at this stage is still under discussion. Originally, the flow of Crescent Isle was to raise the level of support jobs along with the knowledge level, allowing players to try out the dedicated actions. Hardcore players would attempt to clear Fork Tower with the aim of clearing it early, and as this strategy spread, the clear rate would also gradually increase. However, the entry point was too complicated and distorted, making it difficult for even early clearers to enter. Therefore, we plan to make adjustments to return it to the original format and then consider adjusting the difficulty. The interviewer says, was the original idea something that even more casual players could challenge and clear? Yoshi says Fork Tower was actually created under the assumption that it could be cleared by 24 people if the strategy was established, and that the remaining 24 people could aim to clear it with support. However, there was a gimmick that required collective responsibility, so we felt we had not made enough adjustments there. Therefore, the goal of 7.3 is to adjust it to the form that we were originally aiming for. The next Fork Tower is also currently in development, and we plan to implement it with the feedback from this time taken into consideration from the start. We have also received requests to create multiple difficulty levels, so the development team is working hard to achieve that goal, no matter what. End quote. So, feedback, obviously, people found it very difficult to queue in. As such, the difficulty of, the clear rates were low, and their approach to this is actually to go forward, take this on the chin, try to fix it as best they can. You can expect probably some nerfs to the actual Fork Tower, since it was intended to be doable with 24 people and 24 people just supporting or slacking off. So it was supposed to be a more casual approach, but also at the same time they want to focus on the upcoming, the next instance that they're going to do for the other part of the occult crescent, the Crescent Isle. Within the new dungeon is going to probably have difficulty levels, so there'll be something for everybody, similar to how they talked about with the deep dungeon, also in 7.35, right, where there's basically something for everybody. There's an ultimate level difficulty fight if you want it to be that way, or there's also the casual modes and other difficulty modes with different rewards. So it's positive, and they are obviously trying to address the entrance issue as well, which puts a lot of people off from trying it. A lot of people I talk to actually go, have you done Fork Tower? Have you tried it? And they're like, no, why would I bother trying to figure out how to find a group for that? And it's like, yeah, that is true, actually. Yeah, that's the biggest hurdle, isn't it? Finding people. So let's move on. In the main quest, the Warrior of Light's heroic journey begins to unfold. So they say, now let's finally talk about 7.3. First, please tell us about the patch title, which apparently in Japanese, translated badly, is Signpost to Tomorrow. In English, that's The Promise of Tomorrow, so interesting. So Yoshi P says, Golden Legacy has been described as the Warrior of Light's summer vacation. But before the Warrior of Light begins their new life as a hero, they watch over the next generation of young people as they search for their own path, sometimes offering help. This 7.3 patch focuses on the theme of finding each character's path, starting with Urkamat, Wuklamat, I guess, and the others, which is why the patch title is Signpost for Tomorrow, or, Promises of Tomorrow. This signpost represents what Calyx is aiming for, and it also has a bearing on the Warrior of Light's own future. I think you'll gradually begin to see why the Warrior of Light must rise up as a hero once again. Interesting. So they say, so the Warrior of Light's summer vacation's coming to an end. Yoshi P says, saying the end of summer vacation suddenly makes me feel a bit melancholy. Anyway, I think we're starting to see the next hero's journey. Another important character is Sphene. Sphene was put to sleep hundreds of years ago, regardless of their own will, and thought they were dead, but was suddenly resurrected. Meanwhile, the Sphene created from their memories has lived as Sphene for hundreds of years, harboring feelings and doing their best in their own way. These two Sphenes are similar in a relationship to the original world and the mirror world. They originate from the same place. And in 7.3, I think we've managed to depict how the paths the two have walked intersect, and what path Sphene will ultimately take. The interviewer goes, will there also be a resolution to the existence of the Eternal People, an important theme in that story unfolding in 7.x series? Yoshi P says, the issue of the Eternals who appear in the story will be resolved for the time being, depending on how the people at Solution 9 perceive them. However, I believe that the nature of humanity and can humans understand each other are eternal themes, and our central elements in the next story arc of Final Fantasy XIV. Interesting. I believe this is an area that will gradually be woven together, just as it was in the stories from A Realm Reborn to Endgame. In 7.x, we ask, if a person's memories are preserved, does that mean they're alive? But we plan to continue to depict the meaning of human life in different ways. The interviewer says, is it like the same theme glimpsed in different ways? Yoshi P says that's right. This different way is something that will be relevant in the future. I'm just going to leave it at that for now, he says. The interviewer says, that's very intriguing. By the way, the new trial will be kept secret until the patch is released, but will it be something like the final boss of the main quest? Yoshi P says, yes. After all, without battles, you can't create excitement. And even though the characters are moving forward on their own paths, I think it's only when they overcome obstacles that they stand in their way. So this is the final test. We asked Itahana to draw the patch art for 7.3, which also includes this theme. I believe Itahana is the artist who did the Final Fantasy IX art, if I remember correctly. Incidentally, there have been a lot of developments within the company, and Itahana is now working in Creative Studio 3. Interesting. Final Fantasy IX tinfoil hats at the ready. The interviewer says, is that so? Yoshi P says, Itahana was originally a Haikusen, so he'd always said, I'll draw for you anytime. There were a lot of procedures that needed to be done when crossing departments, but now that he's in Creative Studio 3, it's become much easier to ask them for help, he laughs. So the interviewer says, so this patch art is the first result of that? Yoshi P says this time he drew 3 or 4 rough drafts, then adjusted the character placement and orientation based on the intent of the scenario, and finally created the current patch art, which I think turned out really well. Itahana was also in charge of the design of Sphene itself. It's likely we'll see more patch art drawn by Itahana in the future, not just for Sphene or this one. The interviewer says, I was also surprised to learn that Itahana also designed Sphene. Yoshi P says Golden Legacy, or Dawntrail, also had a strong homage to Final Fantasy IX, so we thought it would be best to have Itahana, the character designer for Final Fantasy IX, there we go, draw the character. In the end, I think he created a really great design. Incidentally, Sphene, after her outfit change, is also drawn by Itahana. It's a design that you'd expect and has been very well received, end quote. And quite honestly, how good is it to know that the Final Fantasy IX, artist, character designer, essentially is working at Creative Studio 3. Does this mean that Creative Studio 3, if we put a tinfoil hat on just for a second, has been put in charge of the remake of 9? Or should I stop speculating there? But that's interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. I'm still not going to, lose hope over a Final Fantasy IX remake. I believe it will happen. I really do, but we'll see. The Four Gods and Kamranath appear in Sandoria. Okay. In 7.3, the second installment of Echoes of Vana'diel, Sandoria, the second walk, will be implemented. We expect that the first boss will be revealed during the live letter, which it was. What kind of enemy will be fighting? Yoshi says the first boss is based on the theme of the Four Gods. Furthermore, although it is not decided whether to mention this in the letter from Reproducer Live, one battle will have 4 very different timelines. So obviously this interview was done before the live letter, but released now. And of course, they've already talked about this. So let's move on. But they do say, what? Since there are 4 gods, does this mean they'll also be fighting Kirin, who unites them? Yoshi says, yes, the first boss is actually Kirin, but if all 4 gods were to appear in the previous stages, the battle would take too long. So for each battle, 2 of the 4 gods are randomly selected from the 4 timelines. Okay. The interviewer says, I see. So by playing repeatedly, you can fight all the bosses. Oh, wow. Yoshi says that's right. The first time you challenge it, Suzaku appears, but the next time you challenge it, White Tiger appears. This is the kind of battle we're trying out something completely new. So depending on, I guess, RNG, like how many times you go in there, you'll see 4 different bosses. How cool is that? That is a really cool idea. The last time I remember personally something like this was with Dunscape, where if there was one person in the Alliance raid that was on the unidentified flying object quest in Idleshire, it would spawn the Proto-Ultima fight, but if no one was on the quest, it wouldn't spawn the Proto-Ultima fight. So there's like some kind of triggers there, but they've sort of expanded on that by making the first boss different between a selection. That is cool. That's also a cool way of fan service, right? Especially for crossover Alliance raids. So when you have, you know, beloved characters and enemies from Final Fantasy XI in this case, instead of having to pick between, you know, like 30 enemies, you can get away with having all of them. I wonder how much extra development time that took, though. Interesting. So, moving on. By the way, the scenario released in 7.1 features the keyword "the royal family of the ancients who built prosperity in his world." Final Fantasy XI players can guess that Camlanart and Ancient Zillart will appear, but what do you think about this? Yoshi P says, as you've all predicted, Camlanart will be making an appearance. I think his siblings will also live up to your expectations. So, as it says here, in Final Fantasy XI, he rules Juno as the Grand Duke. His brother, Eldnash, also appears. Those brothers harbour a certain secret. The details are revealed at in the story of Rise of Zillar in 11, so please try playing the game for yourself. I'll heavily recommend. If you can stomach Final Fantasy XI, definitely go play it, although, you know, it's a totally different game. So Yoshi P says, after talking about this much, I'm sure some of you are wondering, what kind of enemies will you face in the other battles? The hint is, I can't believe they brought it up from somewhere like this. He laughs. This is a battle where you fight two enemies at the same time. I'd be happy if you could find out more by actually playing the game. The interviewer says, I have no idea, and laughs. Having said that, I feel like it's in the patch trailer, and as you can see there, Ultima and Omega. So Yoshi P says, Final Fantasy XI has a long history and a vast amount of content, each of which is packed with the player's thoughts. Connecting all of that content and maintaining consistency in a raid dungeon is nearly impossible given the volume. So in Echoes of Vana'diel, we tell a story of Silesia using Electrope, they missed the on the translation, Electrop, apparently, to unfold the remnants of echoes one after another in an attempt to create the strongest king. In the raid dungeon, Silesia's recreations appear as standalone scenes, allowing players to passionately recount each memory, even if the individual scenes are not connected in a consistent way. However, if the connections between the areas are too unnatural, it will just look like they were simply strung together. We're creating this with the ambition of featuring the Final Fantasy XI All-Stars, but we're working hard to figure out how to successfully incorporate that into a dungeon. The interviewer says the first installment, Juno, was made in a way that made me think, oh, so that's how it's going to turn out. And I'm really looking forward to the second installment, they say, for Sandoria. Yoshi P says, since the first installment was introduced as a raid dungeon, I don't think it felt too unnatural. However, if the second installment were to be an even more diverse parade of elements, those who haven't played 11 would be left behind. So I think it's very important to find a way to bring that together. We've been very particular about the connections and nuances of the area's scenery, episodes, and battle gimmicks, so please look forward to it. The interviewer says, I'm looking forward to the second installment even more now. Incidentally, in the first installment, after clearing it, you would wander around Lower Juno at any time and enjoy talking to NPCs. But will you be able to visit the city of Sandoria this time? That's a good question. Yoshi P says, I know many of you are looking forward to this, but this time there will be no element of visiting Sandoria as a city. Oh no. In Echoes of Vana'diel, he says, Lower Juno is the only city that has been recreated and established. That's why we've made updates to that area this time as well. Oh, so they've made updates to the area though. Interesting, but you can't walk around Sandoria outside of the Alliance raid. I'm a little bit sad about that. It would have been cool to have all three, wouldn't it? Does this mean that if you visit Juno after clearing Sandoria, you'll see new changes? Yoshi P says, yes, in Lower Juno, there was an NPC who explained the boss you fought in the Alliance raid. But if you talk to him after clearing Sandoria the second walk, an episode about a new enemy you fought will be added. There are also more NPCs now, and there's an NPC who will check the fashion of the equipment you've acquired. And you can also read the explanation of what that equipment looked like in Vana'diel. What? That's interesting. You can be sure that the development team's extraordinary passion will be packed into Lower Juno once again. End quote. The interviewer says, I'm looking forward to that too. Yoshi P says, after clearing the raid dungeon and completing the quest, we hope you will revisit Lower Juno and enjoy the many rich episodes. End quote. So this whole thing about the Alliance raid, the thing that has me the most interested, I mean, this could be a terrible translation issue here, where NPCs will check the fashion of the equipment you've acquired. So is this badly translated and they're actually saying, like, if you wear, you know, like a full raid gear set, they will talk about it or react to it? That's quite interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that. But yeah, that's cool. It's a bit of a shame that Sandoria isn't explorable, but if they're adding more stuff to Juno, more triple triad cards, more orchestra rolls, you know, more stuff to do, that's cool. So moving on to the deep dungeon then. So they say the new deep dungeon introduces a new system where you can make offerings to strengthen bosses. We recently did a video on everything we know so far. I went quite deep into that using all of the information from the live letters. So if you want to go check that out, check the channel out. So let's talk about this. In 7.3, a new deep dungeon, the Pilgrim's Traverse, will be implemented for the first time in a while. In addition to the gameplay of aiming to reach the deepest floor, there will also be content battle content where you fight an enhanced boss on floor 99 after completing all floors. Could you please give us an overview of this content? Yoshi P says, before I explain the overview, I'd like to first talk about the direction of content. Final Fantasy XIV is an MMORPG that has been supported by a huge number of players, many of whom have been playing continuously for a long time. Therefore, we have implemented various content aimed at different target demographics for each content. For example, in odd-numbered patches, we would implement Alliance raid dungeons aimed primarily at casual players, while on even-numbered patches we would implement high difficulty raids for more intensive players, and even content of extreme difficulty. As a result, even when new content is implemented, not all players can enjoy it. Even within the same patch, there is a trend where hardcore players only play this content and casual players only play this content. This was my policy and the results are consistent. The interviewer says, it certainly depends on how you play, but there are quite a few players who only play content that interests them. Yoshi P says, hardcore players want a high difficulty raid where they can race for world first. On the other hand, casual players want something they can clear in 2 or 3 tries and run around in. That's how we, the creators, have segmented the content and created it. Of course, I don't think it was a bad idea for Final Fantasy XIV up until now, where the main policy was to expand the total amount of content. By categorizing content in this way, the development team was able to establish guidelines for what to create and when, and because the rules were the same, we were able to focus in a certain direction, such as for this content, we'll focus on boss battles, for example. However, now we've finally come to the conclusion that we should start making efforts to ensure that all players can enjoy the large-scale content we've worked so hard to create. The interviewer says, you want as many players as possible to enjoy the content you've implemented? Yoshi P says, yes. This was somewhat the same as previous deep dungeons, where you could clear the story by reaching the 30th floor, and you could also strengthen your weapons and armor by repeatedly playing through up to the 30th floor. We had mid-range players taking on the challenge of a fixed party of 4 to conquer the final floor, and the ultimate goal was to challenge themselves to conquer all the floors from the first floor solo. Of course, there are still people who are looking forward to these deep dungeons, but on the other hand, there were also quite a few people who said, I won't play after the 31st floor. The interviewer says, indeed, I think there was a fairly large proportion of players like that. Yoshi P says, up until now, we thought that was fine. But starting with the deep dungeon, This one, we have decided to make changes to all of the systems so that more people can play. Previously, players could enter the dungeon up to floor 30 using matchmaking, and from then on they had to form a party of 4, fixed. This time, however, we've redesigned the dungeon so that all floors can be cleared using matchmaking. We've also increased the number of floor divisions that players can restart at, allowing players to enjoy the deeper floors more matchmaking based. Of course, we believe that a fixed party allows for more effective teamwork and is closer to clearing the dungeon, so we've retained that element. However, we wanted to significantly change the previous system, which required no other means of clearing the dungeon. This shift allows players to challenge themselves and periodically aim for the next floor. Additionally, once players reach the boss on floor 99, even if they wipe, a new piece of content will be unlocked that allows them to challenge just that boss battle. This content is separate from the deep dungeon, and once players can consistently defeat the boss, we encourage players to aim for that final floor and do it again, whether in a fixed party or a 4-person party. This isn't just a reduction in difficulty, it's about making the challenge easier, allowing even casual players to experience the entire deep dungeon. The interviewer says it feels like there are more opportunities to play. If the range of matching increases, it will be easier to play deeper. That's what she said. Yoshi P says, I think one of the strengths of 14 is that it allows players to play at a relaxed pace thanks to its matching system. So we decided to expand that range this time. However, just like the previous deep dungeons, there are quite a lot of enemies near the final floor, many of which have troublesome attacks. Also, if you rush in without a plan, there is a risk of stepping on a trap and being wiped out, so it is designed to be challenging to play. To sum up, the current theme for 14 is, if we're going to implement it, we aim to create content that all players can enjoy. That is not just for the deep dungeons, but we hope to expand this image to other content in the future, end quote. So the interviewer goes, previously, high difficulty raids could be attempted only by recruiting a party within a world, but with the implementation of cross-world party recruitment and the raid finder, they've become easier to tackle, which has resulted in casual players wanting to give them a try. It's a similar image. Yoshi P says, however, just because it's easier to play doesn't mean we're simply making it easier. After the announcement of the 87th letter from a producer live, we received a lot of feedback saying we want the difficulty level to be guaranteed for solo exploration, and we intend to continue to maintain the gameplay, challenge, and sense of accomplishment that only solo exploration can offer. This time we've also introduced a new battle content system as an element to add to your game after clearing the level. When you complete all of the floors, you'll receive an item called offerings. These are 5 types of this, and if you offer one of these before entering the content, the difficulty of a boss will change. We had a bit more of a read up on this. That's not entirely true. If you want the full breakdown of how many offerings you need, go watch that other video, but yeah. Does making offerings strengthen the boss? Yoshi P says yes, the effects of the offerings vary, such as granting the boss a buff that increases their maximum HP, or multiplying its overall damage coefficient by 1.15. Furthermore, regardless of the type, the mechanics also change depending on the total number of offerings made. Therefore, you can basically adjust the difficulty yourself and aim to clear the boss at a level that feels just right. The reason this boss isn't simply called a high difficulty boss, but rather a challenging one, is because of the difficulty adjustment mechanism. Incidentally, there are 5 types of offerings, and you can offer up to 8 of each type. There we go. For a total of 40 offerings. However, offering the maximum number of all types makes it extremely difficult. In terms of difficulty, it's more difficult than Savage 4, so hardcore players looking to play high difficulty content should definitely aim to clear this ultra difficult battle. So there we go, more confirmation on that. How do rewards change depending on the number of offerings made? Yoshi P says, while the rewards themselves are the same, the number you receive changes depending on the number of offerings you make. Therefore, there's no title that you can only get if you increase the difficulty level, except for the title for defeating the most difficult version, so with 40 offerings. The idea is that those who can clear higher difficulty battles can efficiently earn reward numbers. The main theme of a parameter change using offerings is that they allow players to make developmental adjustments and have fun. For example, you might say, I'm not confident in my party's firepower, so I'll refrain from offering the offering that increases the boss's HP, and instead increase the number with other offerings. As I mentioned earlier, Yoshi P says, the gimmicks and timeline change depending on the total number of offerings made, so I hope you'll try out a variety of different patterns. The interviewer says, this is a gameplay mechanism that's never been seen before. Yoshi P says, I don't think there's anything similar to this in 14 so far. We often receive feedback that it would be more fun if there were multiple difficulty levels for a single boss, and this is our response to that. We've designed it so that it's easier to aim for completion through matchmaking, and once you've achieved it once, the boss battle itself will be counted as content, allowing you to practice and aim for completion. Even in content that only features a boss battle, we've made it so that some of the items the boss drops can be obtained with a low probability. Whether you're looking for a challenging battle or just looking to earn rewards, players will have their own motivations. In addition, we've introduced a new system to the strategy guide that allows you to steadily earn rewards each week. Strategy guide, that's a mistranslation. What they mean is challenge log. So there's actually challenge log rewards for completing certain floors. Just to, focus on that and correct it. He continues, and you can even earn physical items from there. We're currently adjusting Pilgrim's Traverse to cater to all types of players, so we hope that you will give it a try. And the interviewer says, so it's a trial version of content that will interest all players. Yoshi P says, that's right. If we don't continue to create with this level of enthusiasm in the future, the impression won't change, and we'll always hear from all sides that there isn't enough content for players like us. So we're going to change our fundamental way of thinking and make an effort to make what we create available to everyone, end quote. It's interesting. I mean, I talked about this in a separate video, as I say, talking about the Deep Dungeon. The fact that this scalable technology for a boss is something that exists and it's something that they could reuse is incredibly exciting to me. And it would also be a great way of implementing it into older content. So I'll be really interested to see how the mantra of making all content available to everybody, and it just has different difficulty modes, and how this could play into that. So it could be interesting to see this made into how the variant mode is, instead of splitting it into separate developed difficulty modes. It'd be interesting to see content developed with this scaling or option in mind. I would love to see more of that stuff, so we'll see how it plays out, but I'm excited personally. So now we're talking about extreme content. There will be no extreme content in 7.3, but are there any plans for extreme content in the 7.x series? Yoshi P says this time the hidden boss in Pilgrim's Traverse is one that requires 40 offerings, which is pretty close to the ultimate version, but it still requires 4 people to defeat it. Of course, we plan to implement it once more in the 7.x series, and we are currently in the process of creating it. As I've said many times before, developing an ultimate version is really difficult. The interviewer says, I'm looking forward to it. By the way, do you have any future plans for the ultimate version? Yoshi P says, first of all, we're developing Zetsu. Okay. And future plans for Zetsu have not been decided. Zetsu can only be made by staff who are at a level they can handle Zetsu. So as I have said many times, if you think I'm the one, please apply to the development staff member. He laughs. Is Zetsu another word for ultimate? I don't know how that's translated. The interviewer says, the second installment of Cosmic Exploration is also planned for 7.3 series. The setting will remove from the moon to a new planet, Paena, the glass planet. Okay, that's how that's translated. And the graphics will change significantly, but what other elements will be included? Yoshi P says it's been powered up in many ways with a different version of mecha operations and continuous collaborative construction work. However, the most important thing is the feel. Personally, one of the things I learned from the previous Cosmic Exploration was that I was very concerned about the versatility of each task. First of all, crafting and gathering could be made more elaborate, but when you think about repeating tasks over and over again, if each playthrough is heavy, it becomes difficult to play. For that reason, in the Reborn 2.0 game, we deliberately made it possible to complete tasks with macros and focused on the satisfaction of getting the economy going with what you gather and create with your own hands. Conversely, that's why the tasks themselves are designed to be so simple. The interviewer says it's true that if crafting and gathering were to be repeated hundreds of thousands of times and made too complicated, it'd be mentally taxing. Yoshi P says, however, my impression after playing Cosmic Exploration, despite being the latest content, is that it hasn't evolved beyond its simple design, and that the thinking has stalled. Of course, creating quantity to give it volume is extremely important. However, on the other hand, neglecting the feel of a game makes it difficult to provide a good play experience. If you focus too much on quality, it's unlikely to be something that many people will enjoy. And if there's only quantity, it tends to just become a chore. I think the balance in this area is very poor in the current version of Cosmic Exploration. To improve this, we're currently having 70 to 80 staff members actually play the missions and collaborative construction work, discussing and adjusting things like, is this enough to provide enjoyment, and why is the sound effect in this scene generic rather than unique? Etc., etc. Interesting. Yoshi P says it's a lot of work, but the lines that Laporit say in missions and other situations are written by the development staff, so you could say they're filled with our feelings. Since we're communicating our feelings through the Laporits and having players play the game, I think it's important to provide a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction that matches that. It's not just Cosmic Exploration, but recently I've been concerned that in order to increase quantity, there are cases where the sensations and sense of accomplishment felt while playing are being neglected. While the overall structure is of course important, I want everyone on the development team, including myself, to be aware of this and focus on creating content that feels good to the touch. To that end, I'm also working to improve the accuracy of my PD checks. Interesting. And the interviewer says, please take care of your health. Yoshi P says, thank you. I still consider myself to be in my 20s, but recently my eyes have been really tired, dry and blurry, he smiles. The interviewer says, you're probably in the middle of a tough PD check right now, but are there any other points in 7.3 that you'd like us to pay attention to? Yoshi P says, with a large number of players who have been playing for a long time, I think there are many who are looking forward to the changes in the world more than individual pieces of content. For those players, we've kept you waiting, but we've added a number of new headgear pieces that can display on Hrothgar and Viera. You can also now display or hide Viera ears, which should further expand the range of outfit coordination. Also, please keep an eye out for the chat bubble feature, which displays conversations in speech bubbles. While the introduction of this feature won't dramatically change the content itself, having conversations that previously flowed in chat windows appear overhead while you visit each city will enhance the feeling of living in the world. The interviewer says the chat bubble feature seems like it will also be interesting in terms of scenery. Yoshi P says, as a key PvP focus, moving on here, we're also planning to change the PvP action purification. They talked about this in the live letter. In Crystalline Conflict in particular, the basic tactic is to focus attacks on players when they use defense or purification and then defeat them. While the current system is fun, we'll be making adjustments to prevent this tactic from becoming too one-sided. Additionally, we're recently started holding Crystalline Conflict ranked matches on a rotating data center, which has been a welcome boost in number of players participating. However, since you can only register solo, those unfamiliar with PvP tend to steer clear. So now, finally, we're allowing 2-player registration for at least the casual matches. We hope you have fun teaching and learning from each other. Yeah, it's going to be quite fun, actually, to group up with a friend for some casual matches. I do like Crystalline, actually. It's not perfect, but I like it. Moving on. Allowing 2-player registration to increase the player population seems likely. Yoshi P says, this also ties back to what we said about the deep dungeons. The current situation is that PvP content is something not to play for people who aren't interested. We felt we needed to make efforts to make it accessible to everyone, which led to this adjustment. Going forward, we would like to continue our efforts, such as adding a system that will allow players to practice the basics of PvP in advance, events, as well as support functions. We'd like to propose some changes to the Tide of Battle for those who have been playing for a while, so please give it a try. However, currently ranked matches continue to be played until the morning, so if you start playing after work, it's time to sleep, he laughs. And Yoshi P responds, no, I will not go to sleep. I want some private time too. Once I start playing, I can't stop playing without blushing. 7.3, he says, also has many other small changes worth paying attention to, such as the addition of mount riding motions and elaborate seasonal events. Ooh. As with previous major patches, there have been updates to various areas, so be sure to check those out as well. Summer event soon, I guess, right? Then it's continued. I'm looking forward to the latest patch 7.3. At the same time, we're starting to see glimpses of 8.0, and I imagine plans for Fan Festival are already underway. Finally, please tell us again about the highlights of 7.3 and your outlook for the future of Final Fantasy XIV. Yoshi P says, as I said on the 87th PLL, I don't think that 14 is perfect in its current state, and I'm keenly aware that we're facing major challenges precisely because we've built it up over so many years. After receiving a variety of feedback, I've finally been able to put it into words, and patch 7.3 is the time we're beginning to make concrete changes. Having been making MMORPGs for so many years, I know this. The image and impression of a content never changes with a single system, piece of content, or patch, just as it was with the original 14. 1.0. I believe we can only gain trust and confidence by continuing to build on it a step at a time. So we want to approach this as a new starting point for us as well. The interviewer says, so here on you aim to further evolve 14. Yoshi P says, of course, I don't expect all content to suddenly reach the level I've talked about today, but I want to do my best to show you a glimpse of that and my determination. So I'd be happy if you could try out each piece of content, even just a little. In particular, for battles, Pilgrim's Traverse will be the first test. I'd be happy if you could play it from various angles and give us your feedback. And Yoshi P says, we would definitely like to use the feedback we receive in the next update. Incidentally, we're planning a new variant dungeon in the upcoming patch 7.4, which will also be a bit different from previous versions. Interesting. We've changed the flavor so that it can be enjoyed by a wider range of players, and we've also prepared new mechanisms. Oh, interesting. In this way, we aim to create each major piece of content so that it can be enjoyed by a wide range of players, so please look forward to it. We can't reveal the details yet, but of course there will be a lot in 8.0 as well. And yeah, so that's really exciting just to talk about that. So variant mode, criterion modes, like I said before, having those different difficulty layers means, you know, extra work designing them separately. You know, at least I imagine that's how it's done. It would be interesting to see if there is a flexible system similar to how they're doing with the, you know, Floor 99 boss on its hardest difficulty in the offering system. I would be very surprised if they didn't reuse that feature. It's something that they should reuse and experiment with, right? So very excited about that. Very, very much so. And it says, are you planning to announce a fan festival soon? Question mark. Yoshi P says it's customary to announce new expansion packs at Fan Festival. It seems like the date and venue have been finalized, so we're hoping to make the announcement soon. Also, currently updates in China and Korea are lagging behind Japan, North America, and Europe, etc. But we plan to catch up during the 7.x series and unify the update timing for both. In other words, the entire global update will be synchronized. If that happens, the Fan Festival must be quite a challenge, he smiles. Usually it's held in these locations, 3 locations, North America, Europe, and Japan. But does that mean it might be held in 5 locations next time? Yoshi P says, it's definitely impossible to hit 5 locations before the next expansion. First, we want to focus on development while also properly communicating with everyone. Currently, a team in charge of events separate from the dev team is planning a fan fest that will be lots of fun, so we hope you'll look forward to it along with the main game, end quote. And that's pretty much it for everything on the Famitsu interview. Lots of stuff to take from this. The thought process behind opening up the game to more players of all different skill types to give them layered difficulty options for different content to make it so that a patch is seen positively from many different eyes, as opposed to just one particular, demographic or a hardcore demographic. It'll be interesting to see how they deal with things like ultimates, though. I mean, that's the immediate thing I think of. Sometimes like an ultimate piece of content comes out. Are they planning to make an easier version of an ultimate? I don't know. I really like the idea of this scaling system. I don't know what it is about it, but the idea of making it harder to get a better challenge and give you a better reward, like a unique title and stuff, but also like making it easier so that more people can test it and try it out. I think that's quite fun, and it could benefit a lot of pieces of content if you had that way of learning, rather than going straight in, this is the extreme mode. It's like, oh boy, what a step up from a normal mode. It doesn't feel the same. I mean, extreme modes do share a lot with their normal modes, but 9 times out of 10 is like 7 new mechanics that are like not related. So it would be interesting to see how they scale content. It's interesting to see that they're talking about making mechanical and big changes for 7.4 with the variant or criterion or whatever you want to call that content. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And yeah, I'm super excited for the Deep Dungeon more than anything. And it seems that the dev team also seems rather excited to let us try that out and see what things work, give feedback on that. But of course, 7.35 is, maybe a month or 2 away from 7.3. So we're going to be waiting a while. In the meantime, though, I'm really looking forward to the Alliance trade. I think a lot of Final Fantasy XI fans are. And it'd be very difficult not to get excited for all of the new glamour and stuff. But yeah, very excited. This was a very good interview. Famitsu never really lets us down, quite honestly. They are pretty much in-house at this point with Square Enix, so it's no surprise that they have some of the best answers, to questions given. But yeah, that's our little look at that. There'll be a link in the description. Of course, this article is in Japanese. We've been using Google's translate system. So again, citation needed for any errors that most likely have happened. But we did our best here. And I think it's pretty much, 90% correct. So there we go. Thank you for listening to me drone on for a bit. I was interested in this myself. And hopefully you enjoyed listening to me drone. More videos on the way. Obviously, next week we're going to be, doing a lot more content based in the actual game. There is a bit of a lull in content at the moment. Do not forget to do your PvP series stuff. Just as a reminder, if you still need the slasher mount, you have like a week left. So yeah, good luck with that if you're doing PvP. And anyway, more videos on the way. Like I say, much love. Enjoy your day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.